Well, if you have your Bibles, meet me in 1 Timothy chapter 5. Today we want to talk about an honor, a most valuable and precious part of our church family. It's a group that no one wants to join. But if you're married, there's about a 50% chance someday you will. In fact, if you're a woman, there's a 64% chance. If you're a woman and your husband owns a chainsaw and is not afraid of heights, it's pretty much guaranteed. We cherish our widows. Some people have noticed and commented that our church is getting younger, which is a good thing, because if you're not getting younger, you have an expiration date, right? So we have several babies being born this spring, and that's exciting. But we also think we have about 25 to 30 widows, and that's important too. Like, that really matters. And our widows have a depth that you only get by what they experience, right? Grief stretches you. And as you stretches you down, it also stretch you to go up as well. The lows are lower and the highs can be higher. If you're a widow, the gospel's more real to you. It's not just nice that the resurrection is promised, it is necessary, right? It's not just, you're almost forced to rest in Christ. Like, it's got to be true. So if you're a widow, it really matters in a way that the rest of us, it doesn't matter to us yet. And you have a depth of compassion because you've known real pain. And you care for others. You notice others when other people are suffering. You can tell, right, when someone has suffered immensely. There's something about them. There's a wisdom. There's a serenity that they're still here. And they're standing. And there's just a gravitas that they have. So before we look at what God says in 1 Timothy 5, I thought it'd be good to hear from the widows. Most of them from our church, but others from other churches. And I do realize that there's other people that are suffering, right? Singles have their own kind of pain. There's widowers, and that they have pain as well. Divorced people. So I'm not saying widows are the only people that are suffering, but we want to focus on that group today. And also for all of us, if you're married, right, the odds are, well, this will happen to you or your spouse. So this is, when you get married, you make the vow, till death do us part. And when you're 18 or 20, that feels like a long time away. But that will come true unless Christ returns for one of you. Eventually, both of you, unless Christ returns. But that's why it's important. This is a preview, right? This is a good time to take stock of your own marriage. As I told Linnea and Trevor at their wedding, live life backwards, right? Ask yourself, when you're having a fight with your spouse, will this matter at the funeral? And if not, maybe you want to let it go. So the question I ask the widows is, what would you want the church to know about widows and how to care for them? And first I put some of the thoughts together, and I'll get some of the quotes, but here's some of the thoughts from them. Being a widow is part of my identity and sadly a part of my story. But it does not define me. I don't want to be known as a widow. I'm more than that. I want to be treated like a normal person. But there are challenges. It's hard to go to church. Where do you sit? In the same spot where you sat with your husband? That'll bring back all kinds of grief. Who do I sit with? How about eating dinner? Widows say, I don't want to cook anymore. I wanted to cook when it was two of us, but now I don't want to cook for myself. It's hard to go to bed by yourself. You don't wash the sheets, right, for about a month, because the smell, that's the last part of him to go. That's the last thing you lose. And widows have been helped by friends, close friends, coming over once a week, bringing a meal and having a meal and cleaning up the dishes, and then one of them, the wife, spending the night, someone to be with them, to wake up in the same house with them. Family members, you say, come, sleep in my house until you're able to sleep and feel ready to sleep on your own. Widows say, you don't fit in socially. You feel like a fifth wheel. You're used to doing things with other couples, and now you're single. You don't feel like having fun. You don't feel like eating. You need space to be sad. Sometimes you feel guilty when you laugh or smile. How can you smile without him? Or sometimes you need to do something fun, to be normal, to have friends call. Your emotions fluctuate back and forth. Grieving is a long, difficult, unpredictable process. And every joy is tinged with sadness. You wish he was here to share it. You wish he could see his new grandchild, attend the wedding, share a sunset, or guess with you at the crossword puzzle. Now, some quotes. It's so difficult for married people to understand what it's like to have no one in the home to converse with, even about everyday life, things as they happen. It's lonely. So when there is opportunity, or when they can make opportunity, time is so very valuable. It's the best gift, listening, sharing what's going on in their lives too, asking if there's anything you need help with. It could be anything that needs processing, thinking through. It helps so much to talk it out with someone. Everyone grieves differently. Whether it's been a year or 20 years since your husband's death, there's no right way to grieve. We may have unexpected emotional triggers that cause tears, and that's part of the grieving process. Sit with us. Pray for us. Don't forget about us just because it's been years since we became widows. All the grief may fade, but it's still there. Don't say, call us if you need anything. We won't call. Offer a specific date and time for a visit or task. If I refuse, keep asking. The time may come when I am ready to accept your offer. This is me talking. It hits me that grief and death, like the fall, anything that's part of creation, fall, redemption, creation and redemption, those are God's acts, and the fall, that's us, that's sin. Anything connected with the fall is going to be irrational. It's not going to make sense. And so grief is one of those things. So even that, don't forget about me, please call. I'll probably say no, keep calling. We need patience with each other, right? As widows make halting steps to move forward. It's maybe kind of like learning how to walk all over again. There's going to be some falls. If a widow says no, though this tells me is, don't take it personal. It's just they're still working through the process. Going on, the widow writes, part of me died with my husband. I'm not the person I was. One more time. C.S. Lewis has a really good story about this. He said he had friends Charles Williams and Ron. J.R.R. Tolkien. One of the R's is Ron. Maybe both R's are Ron. Ron, Tolkien. I don't know. But Ron and Charles were his friends. And when Charles died, C.S. Lewis was sad because they were the three really close friends. But he said, well, this is really horrible, it's awful, but at least I get Ron all to myself. I'll get more of Ron now that Charles is gone. And he realized, and he writes about this in The Four Loves, that actually I got less of Ron. Because Charles brought something out of Ron that I couldn't bring out. Have you noticed this with friends and people that yourself, you're a slightly different person, depends on who you're around. And some people you can just flat out laugh and maybe have some dark humor with. And I'd like never say that. And some people you can tease, some people you can't. And you're just different with different people. And so maybe this is part of this, right? Widows are saying, my husband was a piece of me. And now that he's gone, I'm not the person I was. I've lost my Charles. She writes, I'm trying to learn who I am without him. I lost not only my husband, but so much that he stood for, hobbies, physical strength, my friend to hang out with, my support system, and so much more. Don't be afraid to mention my husband. Say his name. Tell a story about him. Listen to my stories. Sharing memories is healing. Another writes that the main concern is not seeing people enough. Sometimes family and friends stay away because they don't know what to say and they don't want to make it worse, but the widows need that support. A couple other quotes. These are really helpful, I think. In the days and weeks following my husband's death, I had some folks in our church at the time that would say things like, you are so strong, you're going to be okay, or you have so much faith, you understand that God numbers our days, or worse yet, aren't you glad he's with the Lord? However well-meaning, these and similar statements in times of deep grief are meaningless or even hurtful. When in the throes of deep grief, we do not need a cheerleader reminding us of how much faith we have, that our theology will see us through, or even the reality of heaven. I recall someone saying, it's like your arm has been amputated. My thought was, not at all. I could figure out how to live without an arm, but I've been put through a shredder. and my life is lying in a million pieces around me, and putting it back together is impossible. Grief is profoundly disorienting, and particularly in those early days, we just need people to hug us, cry with us, allow us to speak when we're ready, and not try to help us assign meaning or value to our pain. Also, it may not help to ask, how are you? That's a loaded question for a widow. We often are doing terrible, especially in the first couple of years. I think if you really want to inquire about how a widow's getting along, ask some specific questions. Like, what did you do this past week? Or what plans do you have for the coming week? Are you spending time with family, friends? Is there one specific thing I can pray for you? Are you reading any books that are helpful, any podcasts? Be specific rather than just a general, hi, how are you? And then this one. Allow a widow to feel what she is feeling without attempting to correct those feelings with theology. Okay, that one's at me. That's what I do. I'm a theologian. That's what we do. So if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So don't try to correct those feelings with theology. If she has walked with the Lord for many years, she knows somewhere deep down the truth of who God is. But for a time, maybe longer than you think it should take, Wittmer, she cannot access those truths emotionally. Depending on the circumstances of her husband's death, especially if it's been traumatic, it may take months or years for her to settle back into knowing and trusting the God she thought she knew before. Hear that? It may take months or years for her to recover, to settle back into the God she thought she knew before. He will not let her go, so pray for her and trust him to keep her. As I think about some takeaways for myself from what the widow shared, and thank you for sharing it, that's profound wisdom for us, I realize it's how personal the grieving process is. Each widow grieves differently. If you know one grieving widow, you know exactly one grieving widow. Don't generalize and think, oh, this works for this situation, it must work over here. So it's deeply personal. It's also paradoxical. The grief is deep, but they also think, I don't want this to define me, right? It's ripped out my heart, but it's not the heart of who I am. I have to go, I must go on, but it's never going to be the same. It's deeply it doesn't always make sense, but that's part of the fall, right? It's not supposed to make sense. Death and sin and grief, it's messy. And so that's the other thing. Just know going in, we're going to mess up. We're going to say the wrong thing, or the thing that won't strike them as the right thing. We're going to say or maybe do the wrong thing. And it may be us, it may be them, but just confess, apologize, and keep showing up. It's hard. So thank you, widows, for sharing. That's very helpful. We almost could stop there, except we don't want to just gather and hear our wisdom. We want to hear from God. So 1 Timothy chapter 5, God gives some very practical advice to the church in caring for widows. And a lot of it is financial concerns. And I think it's important to say that widows, if your husband left you his pension or life insurance, or that's not just money. That's your husband loving you. He's still loving you, even though he's not here with you. 1 Timothy 5, as Jim read it, you may have noticed there's some questions here that puzzle you. Like in verses 5 and 6, the widow either prays or she lives for pleasure. Like, that's it? Those are your choices? Verses 9 and 10, it looks like the widows have to earn their spot. Don't put a widow on the list unless she's over 60 and has been faithful and had good deeds and been hospitable and watched be the Lord's people. Like really? You have to earn your spot to be on this list? What about a recent convert? Wouldn't the church care for her? What about a woman with a sordid past who comes to Christ? You wouldn't care for her? Like, sorry, Graham, we saw your Instagram, and we're not going to help you. It also seems a bit paradoxical, maybe negative towards marriage. Look at verse 11. As for younger widows, don't put them on such a list. For when their sensual desires overcome their dedication to Christ, they want to marry. Verse 14. So I counsel younger widows to marry. Like, what? They're going to forsake Christ and get married. So get married. Like, what's going on here? I think these questions show us that there is significant cultural distance from 2026 and when Paul wrote this in the first century. There are things that Paul and Timothy understood, things they assumed each other knew and didn't spell out. So we won't be sure about all the details, but we do know enough that we can hear what God is saying to us today. So being a widow was a pretty big problem in the first century, in the Greco-Roman culture. Men often married younger women, sometimes much younger, like 10 years younger. So not really like May-December weddings, but May-September weddings. And since men had a shorter lifespan because men are so much stress, the older men who died early left bound to leave widows behind. Jesus' own mother was a widow. Remember on the cross in John 19:27, Jesus, as he's dying, tells John, care for my mom. This is your mom, care for her. And John did. And we think John, till he died, took care of Mary all the way in Ephesus. So in the first century, if a widow was young enough to get remarried or had lots of money or kids take care of her, she'd be okay. If she had no family or if she was poor, how would she survive without her husband, her provider, her protector? And her social status often depended on her husband. We have something similar to, I told you a story, I love this story because it's George H.W. Bush and Barbara Bush. Such a great marriage, right? Such good people. And they seem like very humble. George W. Bush, really, H.W., really humble. But one day they were in the back of their limo and they were getting gas. And for some reason, H.W. Bush was feeling a bit full of himself. And he said to Barbara, watch the guy putting in gas, aren't you glad you married me? You could have married a guy like that. And she said, if I had married him, he'd be president. So there's still a little bit of that, but in the first century, a lot of that. Like if you're a woman, your identity depended on your husband. In Ephesus, where Paul's writing this, it's the fourth largest city in the empire, 200,000 people. So lots of widows there. Paul's concern in 1 Timothy 5, I think there's three of them. First, caring for vulnerable widows. No one plans to be a widow. It's not what you wanted, not what you expected. It happens. But the Bible is full of concern for widows. Let me just give you a quick list. In Exodus chapter 22, verse 22, so right on the heels of receiving the Ten Commandments, when God gave Israel the law, when God married Israel, right out of the gate, here's what he says, Exodus 22:22. Do not take advantage of the widow or the fatherless. If you do, and they cry out to me, I will certainly hear their cry. My anger will be aroused, and I will kill you with the sword. Your wives will become widows, and your children fatherless. Also in Deuteronomy 24, verses 17 to 22, God tells Israel, never take the cloak of a widow as a pledge. And when you're harvesting the wheat, don't take a second pass and go make sure you got all the sheaves. When you're pulling out the olives, don't do a second pass. Make sure you got all the olives. When you're picking the grapes, don't do a second pass and make sure you got the grapevine clean. Leave some grapes, leave some olives, leave some wheat for the widows to glean. In Psalm 68, verse 5, who is God? God says, here's who I am. I am the defender of widows. In Isaiah chapter 1 and verse 16, God warns Israel to repent or he'll exile them. He says, wash and make yourselves clean. Take your evil deeds out of my sight. Stop doing wrong. Okay, then what? Learn to do right. Seek justice. Defend the oppressed. Take up the cause of the fatherless. Plead the case of the widow. Plead, beg for widows. And in the New Testament, Mark chapter 12, verse 40, Jesus said, these teachers of the law, you know what's wrong with them? They devour widows' houses. That's Mark 12. On the heels of that, he's really mad. These teachers of the law, you devour widows' houses. Right after that, Jesus sees a widow putting in her very last mite. And he praises her because she gave all that she had. But I wonder if he's a little bit angry as well. You're making her give all that she had. You're devouring her house. Acts chapter 6, verse 1. You know why we have deacons? For widows. Widows are the reason deacons were created by God. Because the Greek-speaking Jews, their widows were being neglected by the Hebrew-speaking Jews, and God said, deacons, have some guys who will take care of all the widows. Then, of course, in James chapter 1, the central verse of our Mended Quiver program, pure religion is this: to look after widows and orphans in their distress. So God cares from the start, throughout the whole Scripture, God cares for widows. So Paul wants to care for them, also to bear witness to others, because for Jewish people who knows God cares for widows, if the Christian church doesn't care for widows, well, you look really bad. Also for the Greco-Roman, the Greek culture. The Greek culture, they were pagan, right? They shared their beds with all kinds of people. They were promiscuous. They were immoral. They shared their beds promiscuously, but they kept their money close. They were selfish with their money and shared their beds. The church is the opposite. We are selfish with our beds. We don't sleep around. We don't share our beds with other people, but we share our money. And so it's a great testimony when you do that. A few years ago, I was on a plane coming back to Grand Rapids, and my seatmate she's from a Eastern European country, and she was a prophet at Grand Valley, and I was talking to her, a conversation, and she said she lives in Hudsonville. And I thought, oh, Hudsonville, famous for 100-car pileups, ice cream, and John Calvin. If John Calvin, I'm pretty sure of this, I can't prove it, but if John Calvin came back today and could live anywhere in the world, he'd want to live in Hudsonville. Like, that's where everyone is still following his teaching. So I thought, well, this is interesting, because she mentioned living there. And I said, well, she said most of her neighbors went to church. And I thought, well, how are they? And I thought, oh, brace yourself. What are you going to hear? And she said, well, she brought her father, who was disabled from this Eastern European country, to her house. And her neighbors built a ramp for him to get in. And they bought a hospital bed and hospital supplies. And she said, if this is what it means to be a Christian, everyone should be a Christian. Like, wow, what a great witness for Jesus. And so Paul says, care for widows is also a great testimony. And then he also wants to efficiently steward the church's resources, to keep off the list people who shouldn't be on the list. Verse 16 and verse 3, he says, make sure they're really in need. And the Greek literally, honor widows who are really widows. So honor them, but verify. And so Paul gives us a checklist to make it onto the list. First, and these are in your notes, you had to be 60 years old. The NIV says not over 60 in verse 9. ESV says not less than 60. Greek is 60-ish. So around 60. The point is, to make this list, you must be past marrying age and bearing children. What about that seemingly contradictory advice in verse 11? He says, younger widows, if they break their pledge to Christ in verse 12, then they will get married. But he says in verse 14, I want them to get married. So what's going on here? Well, I think we find a clue in verse 13. He says these women get into the habit of being idle and going about from house to house. They become idlers and busybodies who talk nonsense, saying things they ought not to. Verse 15, they have already turned away to follow Satan. So the point is, the women in Ephesus, many of them were a hot mess. Look in chapter 2, verse 9 and 10. Paul says, I want women to dress modestly, with decency and propriety, adorning themselves not with elaborate hairstyles or gold or pearls or expensive clothes, but with good deeds, appropriate for women who profess to worship God. You wouldn't have to say that unless there were lots of women who were not dressing modestly. The big point of dressing immodestly, the big problem is you want people to look at you. It's attention-seeking behavior. So men and women can both struggle with lust, right? But it's a bigger problem for men and women. So men struggle with, I don't want to take that woman with my eyes. I don't want to lust in my heart. And women struggle with, but I want to be taken. I want to be the kind of person that a guy would want to take. And Paul says, no, don't dress modestly. Dress appropriately. Let your attraction be the good deeds from inside, not in a way that encourages men to want you, that aren't married to you. And then 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 6 and 7, another comment. He says, these false teachers are the kind who worm their way into homes and gain control over gullible women who are loaded down with sins and are swayed by all kinds of evil desires. The men, of course, weren't a picnic either. Back in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 3 through 5, Paul says that there's false teachers in Ephesus who, end of verse 5, they think godliness is a means to financial gain. So putting all this together, there are these false teachers in Ephesus who are taking advantage of gullible women, and the women are paying them money and maybe performing some very sexual, salacious things, because 2 Timothy 3:6, there are all kinds of evil desires. So Paul's point is, there's more here than just age and remarriage. It's heresy and sexual sin. And Paul's saying if you give money to a widow and put them on the list, and she gives that money to a false teacher and does sexual things with him, you're actually subsidizing the false teaching. You're subsidizing sin. So just keep that younger widow off your list. Don't risk it. What did he mean in verse 12, though, when he says these younger widows, if they do marry, they break their pledge to Christ, their first pledge? Our best guess here is there are, in Ephesus, a pagan city, most bachelors would be pagan. If you marry one of them, you tend to adopt the religion of the husband. He's the head of the family. And so you'd be unequally yoked, and you probably would adopt his religion. So Paul's point is, remarry only in the Lord. If you marry an unbeliever, you're now forsaking Christ. If you remain single, you risk being swept up with the false teaching. So that's the point about being 60 years. Also, verses 4 and 8, he says, you should not be put on the list if you have family that can take care of you, but only put people on the list who are alone, who need the help. This is a word for the rest of us who are in families who have widows. In America, we have freedom, and so we like to follow our passion, right? You've heard the saying, get paid for what you love to do, and you'll never work a day in your life. And that's true. Like I get paid to do what I would do for, I shouldn't say this, I do this for free. But I'm not, it's work, but also I enjoy it, right? I can't wait to get out of bed and do this work. There is a danger, though, in getting paid for what you love. Something I have to wrestle with, too, and everyone who, if you're honest, once you start getting paid for what you love, you might not love it as much. It might start feeling like work. So it's not the worst thing in the world to have work be work. And then what you love, that's in your free time. That's your hobby. That's your avocation. That's okay too. But sometimes in America, people that are so idealistic and I must do what fulfills me, and they wait and wait and wait for the job that's the perfect fit, and they have family members like a mother who's a widow who could use the help, or children who need a parent, a dad to support them, and they're taking unemployment. They're living off the state. They're living off of welfare when they could work, but they're waiting for that perfect fit. Paul says to them, look at verse, well, where is it? Verse 8. Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. If you have family that depends on you, and you're not working because you're waiting for the perfect fit, God says you are worse than an unbeliever. Someone doesn't even profess to believe in God. That sounds harsh. It's supposed to. The Christian faith, it's practical. When you honor a widow, you honor her husband. Do you want to honor a man who's passed? Take care of his family, the family he left behind. So a widow must be 60, have no family that can care for them. She must be poor, really in need. Verse 5, she's praying for food. She must be godly, verse 5, someone who's praying for help. And this praying for help also could be a widow, part of her repaying for the help she's getting, right? A widow maybe So here we want widows to serve, and our widows can do a lot, but some widows, end of your life, you can't do anything but pray. And if you notice people say, well, I can always pray, as if it's like, well, that's the last thing I can do. Shouldn't that be the first thing we do? Imagine if you had some kind of some project you're working on, and you had the child of the president of the country in your group, and they're working, and you're hitting a brick wall, you're getting stymied, you don't know what to do. And finally the guy says, well, I can always call Dad. Like, now you say, now? Like, shouldn't they have done that first? Like, why do you think you're even in the group? Because of your connections. Like, you can pray. We can talk to our Father. That should be the first thing. And so widows are not like, well, you can't do anything else. You can still pray. No, you can do the most important thing. Also, she must have a history of faithful service, verses 9 and 10. She must be hospitable. The word hospitable there means, the word xeno is in there, like xenophobia, fear of outsiders. A hospitable person cares for outsiders. They make them feel at home. All these good deeds, washing feet, devoting yourself to others, they're all physical. They're all practical, like mom, what mom would do. This criteria, it prevents non-Christian widows from pretending to be Christian to receive the aid. Now, the church cares for everybody, but you have to prioritize, and so to make the list, you had to have a record of godliness. So with that, what are our takeaways from Paul's list? First, in your notes, there's this big word, subsidiarity. That's kind of scary, but here's what subsidiarity means. The best care comes from those who are closest to the situation. It means the best decisions, the best acts of service come at the most local, immediate level. So in 1 Timothy 5, first care within your family, because a family knows what's really going on. You know if your parent is really in need or if they can work. So families care for themselves. If there's something that breaks down there, then it goes to the church. And the church is local enough, the church is immediate. It can know what's going on and care for them. That's where Paul stops. In our day and age, if the family fails and the church fails, it would go to the government, go to the state. And the state steps in and cares, but the state doesn't know. The state is this blunt instrument, right? It doesn't know the specifics. And so the state can give these big programs that are generic and general, and they affect everyone. And some people they really help, and some people they really hurt. So subsidiarity means the best care happens at the most local level. Also, moral proximity. This is Galatians 6:10. We saw it a couple weeks ago. As you have opportunity, do good to all people, especially to those who belong to the family of believers. This is a problem with the internet age, right? How many times a day do you think you come across someone who's asking for money? Or who could use money? Someone else is asking for money for them. And you have the money. Like, you could give that person money. There's all kinds, in other countries, all kinds of opportunity. If you feel this pressure of, I've got to help everyone who asks for money, and that could help, you will go crazy. You'll never be able to enjoy anything. So one help is called moral proximity. We are most obligated to help those in our sphere of concern. So within your family, within your church, our benevolent fund is primarily for those in our church. We also can help others, but we want to focus moral proximity, do good to everyone, but especially to believers. So we give to North Kent Connect, and that's for everyone. And then because with the benevolent fund, we want to know who we're helping and if we're actually helping. You can actually hurt people if you don't know the situation. I've had to tell people that I've given them grocery money, but now we have to stop because you actually could work. It would be a sin for me now to give you another gift card to Meijer. I'd be sinning against God because the Bible says if you don't work, you don't eat. And I'm helping you eat when you refuse to work. But because I knew that person, I knew they could work. But if I don't know them, my money might be hurting them, may not be helping them. So the third point is, in giving, you want the person you're helping to retain their dignity. You want reciprocity. You don't want just to give in a way that, humiliates them. So, maybe 25 years ago, I was teaching a Sunday school class at West Canaan Baptist, and we had this great idea. There's a family in town that needed help. It was Christmas time. Let's take groceries. And remember, Randy DeHaan, Dave's brother, helped, and we had van loads of groceries about Christmas time. We went to this person's house, and we went in there, and the mom is there, and the kids are there, and I noticed the dad wasn't there. And I was miffed. We, at great cost, at great expense, we brought you van loads of groceries and toys for the kids. Dad, you could at least shown up. You could at least be here and say thank you. Later I realized the dads are never there. And it makes sense. When you show up with all these gifts for my family, what are you telling my wife and my kids? That I failed. I could not provide for them. I'm not a man. That's why he's gone. I thought, we blew it. We were so happy and so proud of ourselves, and we didn't even think about the other person. I have a friend who was helping a homeless man in town and had a friendship with him, and gave him a lift one day to another part of town. When the guys get in the car, the homeless man says, "Here, can I pay you for the ride? Can I give you $10? And the guy said, "No, you're homeless. I'm doing this to help you." But the homeless man said, "But I need to give you $10. It's part of retaining some dignity. And so, Paul, as you're helping the widows who need the money, they can help you back. And so our widows here, they serve in important ways. And we want to include them and bring them in because they're a vital part of our church family. This is one other important thing that's really important. Here's how that dignity and helping people with dignity is very different from the gospel. When you help someone, Arthur Brooks writes on happiness. He says in his studies on happiness, happiness is earned success. If you're successful but didn't earn it, you're born on third base, thought you hit a triple, you're not really happy. But if you were born with nothing and worked your way up and earned it, you're happy. Your success means something. Happiness is earned success. That's true. So if you want to help somebody, you give them a hand up. You don't give them a hand out. You don't just give them fish. You teach them how to fish, right? That's good common sense. But the gospel is the opposite of that. The gospel is not a hand up. It's not, Jesus didn't die on the cross to give us a boost, to somehow preserve our dignity and self-respect. The gospel, here's why it's great news, it's a hand out. Flat out, you can do nothing. We can't raise a little pinky finger to contribute to that. Jesus died because we flat out deserved hell and could do nothing to earn that love. So as we help people and preserve their dignity, we also can't lose the gospel. There's a tension here. The gospel is flat out, hand out, 100% what Jesus did for you. We contribute nothing. Cody and Lindsay this morning, right? What'd you do? Nothing. I brought my sin. He gives me his righteousness. I give him all my debts. I get all his savings. That's a great deal. But you did nothing for it. Okay, but now that you're saved, now you're born again, now that you're in Christ, the Spirit comes. Philippians 2:12-13 says, so now work out your salvation with fear and trembling because God's at work in you. So you come to Christ, it's 100% Jesus, and it's still 100% Jesus, but now the Spirit of Christ is in you, empowering you to become more godly. And the last point, this is countercultural, what God says to us this morning. Women say that as they age, they notice they become less visible. Right? If you're young and pretty, you enter a room and everyone wants your attention. As you get older, people, they don't see you anymore. Well, God says that's not how it is in the church. Leviticus 19:32, stand up in the presence of the aged. Show respect for the elderly and revere your God. Proverbs 23:22, do not despise your mother when she is old. So, widows, you need to know we see you, we love you, we need you. And you are on a very hard path. Some of you, it's just started, like my mother, it's only been a few months. For others, it's been 20 years or more. It's still a hard path. It's not what you had wished. It's not what we would have wished for you. But your life isn't over. We still need you. Your life has purpose. And we are privileged to walk with you. And we'll figure it out together. Will you pray with me?